Hello, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm actually starting a new type of video I've been meaning to get around to, DIYs. I only made a couple of these on my old channel and I'd like to make them more frequent and generally get more crafty. People have taken notice of my handmade sets and props, so I figured it'd only be appropriate to provide some guidance even if I'm no professional. In this video I'm going to be providing some general DIY tips for sets and props rather than going over how to make specific items. The time will come for those, but this video serves as a general guide on sets complete with basic DIY tips. I want to leave room for your creativity to flourish and give you some general ideas rather than limiting you to a step-by-step process. So let's talk about how I personally make my sets. There are three main aspects I take into account: background, props, and layout. For my backgrounds, I'm usually just clipping some scrapbook paper to a stable wall, in this case a binder. I would just tack them to my bedroom wall, but it's pretty far from where I sit, meaning I'd have to reach out to actually use my LPS. Scrapbook paper is incredibly useful for backgrounds and props, and they're pretty much the main material I use for my sets. My favorite, and the type I highly recommend, is more natural scrapbook paper that includes wooden, carpeted, and tiled patterns. I got a pack of these, and they have by far been the most useful for not only backgrounds but also props. That said, you don't need scrapbook paper for backgrounds, and there are several options out there. You can use binders, notebooks, felt, fabric, construction paper, or even just your plain old wall. Sometimes I use this decorated box that I use to store my furniture. You can basically use anything big enough to cover the screen. You can also put stickers, small posters, or any other decoration on your wall to spice things up. I like to print out random posters, designs, or even menus to use in my sets. There are so many things you can use for walls and floors to spark up your set and make it one of a kind. Sometimes I like to use certain patterns and colors depending on the context of the video or set. For example, I use scrapbook paper covered in kisses for my crushes video and scrapbook paper covered in pizza for my cooking video. For my more specific sets, like the one I made for Tattoo Crew, I create rooms. Now, I used to create rooms complete with 2 walls and a floor, but I realized they were 1, difficult to film with, and 2, harder to store. You can absolutely make rooms this way if that's what you prefer, but there's a few things to keep in mind. Make sure the floor is flat, stable, and easy for your pets to stand on. You don't want a flimsy, unbalanced floor because it may be hard to work with. I'd recommend taking some LPS that already struggle a bit with standing, like a Cocker Spaniel, to test the stability. If you intend to film videos using this set, make sure you'll have enough space for your phone or camera while still being able to capture multiple angles of the room. For me personally, I found it much easier to create one simple wall. I take some cardboard I get in a package I order routinely and cover it in scrapbook paper, stickers, and anything else I can find to bring it to life. These are not only easier to film with, but also much easier to store, and I can just stack them all in a drawer somewhere. Another benefit to this is that you can utilize both sides of the wall for 2 completely different sets, which allows you to use your materials to the absolute fullest. For the Tattoo Crew set specifically, I taped a bunch of scrapbook paper to the walls, all coming from one big pack. These scrapbook paper packs are really useful if you're looking to get some because you can have a ton of different colors and patterns to use right off the bat rather than buying individually. Another reason these collections can be really useful for designing these rooms is that you can use so many different papers but still stick to a consistent theme because these packs tend to follow a specific color scheme. This is shown in Tattoo Crew's set as it utilizes several different papers but still manages to stay cohesive throughout. Knowing the context of your set is very important as well. Tattoo Crew takes place in a tattoo shop, so I tried to keep that in mind while constructing this wall. I added some simple drawings and designs to the set because the characters are artists, so having their work on display makes sense and brings a little more life to the shop. On top of walls, you can also utilize materials for floors. I usually keep my floors plain, but sometimes I like to add scrapbook paper or, for carpet, felt or fabric. You can also make rugs out of those materials as well. For Tattoo Crew, I made 2 rugs using scrapbook paper and glued them to cardstock. It's really important if you're working with something as flimsy and weak as paper to glue it to some sort of stronger material to keep it from getting damaged. Cardstock is like paper but more firm and sturdy, and it helps to maintain these rugs and keep them from getting folded. You could also use something like cardboard or foam paper. I also have several rugs I've cut out from fabric and felt in different shapes. Circles, squares, and everything in between to give it a little variety. It's nice to have these on hand so I can use whichever color or shape suits the room best. Now that we've gone over backgrounds, let's talk about arguably the most important part of any set, the props. This includes furniture, decorations, and small everyday items that your set needs in order to thrive. Like backgrounds, the context is important to consider when you're making your props. What kind of room is it? What purpose does it serve? I think the most significant props for any room is the main furniture, like tables, chairs, and shelves. These are the items I find myself using in just about any set. There are many ways to create these, which I'll be exploring in a separate video, but what I can tell you is that cardboard's my best friend. My most common table is made using only cardboard by folding the ends inward in order to make it stand. You can also add scrapbook paper, decorative tape, construction paper, and other materials to spark them up. Whichever one you use can be determined by the set. If your set is mostly filled with a certain color scheme or theme, you may want to take that into account when decorating your props. For example, Scarlett's dorm is full of plants and her wallpaper is decorated in flowers. That makes the table, also covered in flowers, appropriate for the set. I would recommend making several of the most major furniture items. Something for props to sit on, like tables and shelves, and something for pets to sit on, like chairs and couches. You can make several kinds using different methods, which I will go over in future videos, or you can look up DIYs to find inspiration. Utilize different materials and decor to make them all unique. It's nice to have several of each on hand, or else you end up like me back in the day. You'll see the same few items used over and over without anything to spice them up or make them different from one another. For example, I only had one lamp on hand and two of these foam chairs in the same color. I'm personally not a fan of repeat sets and try my best to make each one unique, even if it's just a differently colored table or an additional rug. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with reusing the same props, but it's the different combinations of props and how they're laid out that make each set unique. You can make so many different shapes, sizes, and versions of these furniture items depending on the theming of your set. What's helped me get creative is by not just looking at LPS DIY videos because they tend to follow similar patterns and guides. While they can be helpful, you should never just rely on one source when there's millions of ideas out there waiting for you. I like to look at real examples of rooms and furniture in many different styles and themes to get my creative juices flowing, but it may be easier to do this when you have more crafting experience. I recommend starting out with basic DIY videos that you can follow step by step before breaking out of your comfort zone and trying new things on your own. As for more minor props, we need to talk about decorations for your set. One of my favorite ways to find inspiration is looking at Animal Crossing or any other game that involves decorating a home. Even if you don't have these games, you can look up room designs that people create online. You can even look around your own house and see what you have sitting on tables and shelves. Some of the most prominent items I notice lying around the house or being used to decorate in video games are electronics, food, drinks, books, plants, and toys. Don't feel pressured to make all of these on the spot, but it's really useful to have these on hand when your set is looking a little bland. I usually like to use my props depending on the color scheme in the room, meaning I already have the background pre-established. You can also place the props depending on the context of the set. If the character owning the room is a messy person, scatter their shit all over the place. You can always use sets to show the audience what your characters like between their cleanliness and their taste in decor. And hey, you don't even have to make the props if you don't have the materials or knack for crafting. You can always buy miniatures at Michael's, Hobby Lobby, and any general craft store. A lot of my props are handmade, but many are purchased, especially ones that are too advanced for me to create myself. What matters is how you use and place these props in your set. So let's talk about that. Layout is an important aspect of putting together sets. It can be hard to find variety in how you lay out a room when you only have a certain space and angle to work with if you're filming. A challenge for me was my 10 types of teachers video, where I had to make at least 10 different classroom designs throughout the video. Of course, none of these were real ambitious because I didn't want to push myself. They were just different enough to make each classroom its own. A big part of this included the layout. All these classrooms mainly utilized very similar props. A teacher's desk, the students' desks, notebooks, and school supplies. Therefore, the main differences had to be the background and the layout. This would often involve slightly different placements of the tables. Sometimes the teacher would be on the left side of the room with the classroom on the right, and vice versa. Certain props would peep in and out, and sometimes the class would sit at one round table and other times individual desks. There are infinite possibilities in how you can lay out each room and make them unique from one another. You'd be surprised by how much of a difference it can make. Now we're getting into general advice for when you're crafting. These aren't specific step-by-step creative processes, but rather tips you can use when making just about anything. It can also help you stay organized and gather supplies so you can be prepared for future crafts. Number 1, save boxes. These can be really useful if you need cardboard or if you want a foundation for a full room. Cardboard is one of the most essential tools for crafting in my experience, so it's always good to have some on hand. I get most of my cardboard from random packages or boxes from cereal and snacks. In general, it can be useful to save various materials and items if you think you'll need them in the future. But with all that said, number 2, don't hoard. Don't obsessively hold on to every single thing you believe might be useful in some kind of vague future craft you don't even have a solid plan for. Hold on to things when you know what you'll use them for. Something that might help with this is... Number 3, label your loose materials. Random materials you're saving for future crafts should have a specific reason to be held onto. It's not a good idea to hoard a bunch of shit under the guise of, I'll probably need it for something eventually. For what though? Whenever I save certain materials, I'll often label them with a sticky note stating what exactly I need it for. This way I know why I'm holding onto it and I don't forget. Say I'm holding onto a big box of cardboard and I'd like to use it for a future diner set. I can label it Diner. There are obviously some materials that are just good to have on hand because you need them for a vast array of crafts rather than one specific thing. I have a good collection of cardboard, foam paper, scrapbook paper, and more, even if I don't specifically know what sets or props they'll be used for. They get used in a majority of my crafts, so they're just useful to have available at all times. That said, limit yourself on how much you collect and remind yourself you can always get more if you run out. Number 4, write a list of crafts to make. It can be really overwhelming, especially when you're first starting out, trying to keep track of how many things you need to make for your sets. That's why lists and organizers can be really useful to keep you grounded. Make sure not to be too vague either, that can make things worse. If I just write down chair on my list, I get hit with a million possibilities. What kind of chair? What set is it for? What color? What decoration? If you want to go the extra mile, you could always write down the specific materials you'll need alongside it, plus extra details on how you'd like to decorate it. Number 5, I mentioned this earlier, but start out by copying DIYs, then branch out on your own. When you're first learning and you don't know what you're doing, following strict step-by-step DIYs is the most useful thing you can do. Even if you want to branch out and be more creative, it's good to start small and learn where your skills lie before getting too ambitious and disappointing yourself. Once you get a knack for certain crafts and you feel more confident, then would be an appropriate time to try new things on your own. Number 6, have immediately accessible trash. When you're crafting, you're going to end up with a lot of scraps and excess material you don't need. I like having either a trash can or a little Ziploc bag near me at all times so I can toss any scraps rather than having to walk to my kitchen every time I cut off a little extra scrapbook paper. Number 7, learn how to work with different types of glue. Glue sticks, hot glue guns, tacky glue, all these things work differently and are made to handle different tasks. I stick to glue sticks and a hot glue gun, but it's useful to have a large variety for different situations. I use a hot glue gun for most of my crafts, but glue sticks are helpful when dealing with thinner material like paper. It can be dangerous to use a hot glue gun in that scenario because it's a lot easier to burn yourself with thinner material. Number 8, glue your materials to the right side of the scrapbook paper. This is a really specific tip, but this has gotten me a couple times, so I'd like to warn you before you make the same mistake. Let's say I'm making a table and I want to decorate it with scrapbook paper. I have to glue one side to said scrapbook paper. Make sure you don't glue it like this. When you flip it over, you'll realize you've accidentally made the blank side of the paper the one everyone can see. Make sure you glue everything to the back side of your scrapbook paper so the decorative side is the focus. Number 9, last but not least, one of the most difficult tips to follow, keep your crafts organized. It can be so overwhelming having a lot of projects, whips, and finished crafts but not knowing how to store them. I still struggle with this today, but here's some of the things I do to stay organized. First off, I have this set of rainbow drawers that I've used for nearly a decade to store a lot of my smaller props I use for videos. I have them organized based on the item like food, clothes, outdoorsy, and miscellaneous. There are also much bigger furniture items which I have stored in bins. There's also the struggle of having very large items like this kitchen set and bleachers which I still don't quite have a spot for, but something like a shelf might be really useful, especially if you have some fragile crafts you don't want colliding with others. Another thing I like to utilize is Ziploc bags. I have so many food items that it gets overwhelming, so I have them organized based on meals, drinks, and desserts in separate Ziploc bags. One last thing I'd like to get in the future is one of these organizers. I would really recommend these for storing smaller items considering that's what these are designed for. And of course, you should have a designated spot for all of your crafting materials. My space is still awfully crowded right now, but I have a special shelf containing all of my crafting items as well as a separate one storing my foam paper, felt, cardstock, and scrapbook paper. Most storage items like bins and shelves are going to be easiest to find at your local craft store. These places are gold mines not only for crafting materials but ways to store your finished products. And those are all the tips I have for you today. As I've said, I'd like to make specific step-by-step guides on how to create certain items in the future, but until then, I hope this video was useful and I hope you all have a wonderful day.